I was doing a summer camp with kids and learnt to do a crochet flower to teach it, and loved it, and it just came to me that I'd quite like to have a go at this and do it well, and researched, and before I knew it, a business had formed in my mind, really. God spoke to me about it being time for me to be like a butterfly in the second half of its life, ready to flourish and fly. And I would just turn 40, and creativity had been on the back burner a long time, and so it was time for me to get going finally.
So it was a kind of a transition point where I'd been working for about 7 years in the industry, and I'd worked for an independent designer and then for a much larger scale retailer. And it was kind of that crossroads, and I thought, well, I'd always thought about setting up my own business, my own label as a fashion designer, but never really thought that was possible. And so it was really through that I decided that I would maybe make the step and think seriously about it. I'm a creative. I guess design is an innate part of me, and I think it's a gift that we have, and it's really important that we engage in those things. I've always loved sales as well. So I'm a designer that works very much with kind of the product development, but also the relational aspect. And I think those two things in partnership dovetail quite well to actually look as a viable option to launch my own brand.
I kind of fell upon it, if I'm honest. So I was employed by another builder, not quite sure what I was going to do, and he wanted me to go self-employed. So I was employed by him, but self-employed. And that was back in 2007. And my work with him then dried up. And so I just carried on doing the odd bit and piece here and there until probably 3 or 4 years later, when I realised this was probably what I was supposed to be doing, and started to be more active in actually building a company. I was always practical and good at doing things with my hands. I didn't know what I was going to do at that stage of my life. So I started working for a friend someone who used to go to my local church, who was a builder. And the rest, as they say, is history. I kind of started doing that and gradually got more and more into it until we are where we are today.
So conceptually, I started to consider going freelance in 1995. It was a planned exit out of my corporate environment, and I took redundancy in 2000, and that's when I then set up. So my background is human resources, so I've always been interested in the personal development and training and development side of HR. So really, it was a natural progression to set up as a consultant, doing leadership and organisational development.
Probably sort of 6 to 12 months before we actually started the business. I've been thinking about my next career move. I was working in an accounting firm in the city of Cambridge and couldn't really see where that was going to go long term. The founders, the partners of that business were quite a bit older than me, but had not made plans for the next generation. So I started talking to some trusted friends, and they were keen for me to do what I'd expressed interest in the past. They reminded me that I had talked about wanting to run my own business. So the final sort of decision was made in early 1998, but actually at that point we were expecting our first child. So it was momentarily put on hold until said child was born, and actually we launched the business in September 1998.
Basically, since I was 15, I've taught music on a self-employed basis. And over the years, depending on how much employed work I've done, that bit has just got smaller or larger. But since 2014, I've been totally self-employed. I think the idea to become self-employed, it just comes from this desire to just want to be in control of the rhythm of my life more and more. Alongside the desire to, whatever we have, whether that's talents or whether it's material things, well, let's put them before the Lord and see what He wants to do with them. And we happen to live in Cambridge, so if you rent out rooms in Cambridge, you get a good amount of money. And then I guess I just heard about Airbnb and just thought, wow, that's something that we could do. Obviously, Airbnb is more work than just renting out a room, but the income is way bigger than you get if I just rented out the space to one person all the time. When I left being a director of music full time, and because I've lived in this city for 20 years, I knew that I had lots of connections. So I was pretty confident that within a year, I would have enough teaching that would make the income that I needed from that sort of bit of my life. And if it hadn't worked out with one-to-one pupils at home, I would have gone to local schools and got some teaching there.
Starting up a business is fun and stressful, challenging and exciting all at once. Your emotions go up and down, in and out, round and round, and I really enjoyed the whole process of making something happen that wasn't there before, but it can be quite stressful.
Exciting. I was coming out of being a mum, and so it was great to have something that was just about me. Yeah, and a big learning curve.
It was really exciting, the thought of actually doing your own thing, but I think at the same time it was also quite a scary thing. You're putting yourself out there in front of your client base, and so you can feel quite exposed in that scenario. So there was that mix of excitement, but also the apprehension of the unknown as well.
The very moment that I was suddenly left self-employed and on my own, having been basically sacked by the guy who I was working with, just said there was no more work, and that left me on my own. That was a scary moment, not knowing what I'm going to do. There have been lots more of them since, as we've battled through not knowing how we're going to pay bills and rent. But it's been an exciting journey where I've seen God pull through and show his provision, and I've grown lots in a journey of faith.
Well, it was scary and it was exhilarating, both kind of simultaneously. So
It's quite scary to start with, but fun. The concept of being your own boss has responsibilities, but you are sort of accountable to yourself, as it were. But yeah, good fun.
I love working on my own and being in charge of how I organise my life. I think that's something God's done in me, because I think 10 years ago I would have found it quite hard not to have had the structure of the 9 to 5. And when you have total control over how you organise life, that's not without its challenges. And I think you have to learn how to make life work with that.
We did really basic market research, but actually it was just what we needed to give us the confidence to push ahead with starting up the business. We made about a dozen designs and showed them to 10 or so people who we thought would be our target demographic, and 9 of the 10 said that they loved the designs and where could they buy them from and how soon will we have them ready. So that really boosted our confidence, and we just started going ahead and making those cards.
I'm doing much more now than I did at the start, but I guess I researched Etsy, the sort of first place I thought I might sell, just to see prices and what was selling and the quality and what was out there, really.
My initial market research, in a sense, came through my initial employment. I worked for a medium-sized designer for about the first 4 years of my career, and many of the relationships, but also the kind of the model of working grew out of that from my experience. So in a sense, I knew that there was a market for it because I'd worked within the context of that market already. And so that gave me the confidence to be able to kind of step into the realm that I was working in.
I did absolutely zero market research. I fell into being self-employed, having been asked to go self-employed by my previous employer. I have confidence that there is always a need for building work, but whether I was going to get any was a question that kind of evolved as I went on. Because I kept going rather than I actually did some research, planned that it would work and made a clear plan. I've followed my feet and my head, and thankfully God's been in it as I've gone.
if I'm honest, I didn't really do any market research. It just felt the right thing to do. It felt the right timing. And someone said to me, well, why not? And I thought, well, why not? So I did.
So again, not a particularly innovative idea. However, I had been conscious that sort of traditional accounting firms doing auditing and tax weren't as proactive as they could be. So I basically, by choosing the name of the firm, really, Business Partners, wanted to partner with the clients and have less clients but be more involved in depth in their business.
I didn't do any market research. I think I just felt God had told me to do it, so I just did it. I remember somebody coming round and they didn't know that I was considering leaving full-time work. and they said, "We've had this picture for you, and it's about this poppy dying off at the end of a season." And there are a number of words, and I remember praying about it and thinking, well, should I do it in January, or should I go to the end of the academic year? And I just felt God say, yeah, you could wait to the summer, but wouldn't it be fun to do it now? I thought, yes, please. So I just did it.
I looked where I might be selling and what was there and how it compared to what I was offering, that sort of thing. I researched on Etsy, which is where I was planning to first try and sell, looking at what other people were doing of a similar nature, what the quality was, what the pricing was, and to see how I would be able to fit into that market and compete, really.
So I hired a sales agent. So for the first kind of 4 years of business, first 8 seasons, I had an agent who worked very closely with me. He wasn't a big agency, but he certainly was connected sufficiently to be able to introduce us to new clients as well as existing relationships that we'd already developed. And in fact, we'd worked together in my first job. And so again, I was confident that he would be able to open up doors and opportunities for sales as well.
I haven't done anything to identify competitors per se. When I get the opportunity, I do ask clients if they can compare quotes, some that I've got and some that I've not got. When I know that they've got several quotes and they either come back to me with yes or no, I do ask them for feedback on different quotes, but I haven't done anything to specifically identify competitors.
I didn't. It's the simple answer. I never really think of it in the terms of competitors. There's plenty of work out there. It's who God gives me, and that's where I go.
Not a great deal, other than I guess having worked in an accountancy practice and known what traditional accountants were doing, I was trying to do something a little bit different, perhaps a bit more proactive and focusing on less clients.
I didn't do anything to identify my competitors. Because I teach the harp, there aren't many of us. So I know the other harp teacher in Cambridge, and she's very lovely, and she has many, many pupils. But if anything, we would both have a waiting list at any given time, would be, because there aren't very many harp teachers. I don't know when Airbnb started, so I don't know when we were sort of getting involved with it. I think I did know a few people who did it, but I think Cambridge is a great city, and I set it up thinking I know what I like when I go to stay somewhere, so I just did it like that. And it's very funny that I get complimented on my cleaning all the time, because that wouldn't have been something I would have expected to be good at, but it's because I know what I like when I go somewhere, so that was the model I used, really. I did check, you can go on Airbnb and see where other properties near you, how much money they bring in, so I did obviously do that to sort of work out what sort of money we're talking about. So that was one thing that I did do, to make sure that the figures in terms of how much is the loan going to cost, is this actually all going to sort of work out? But of course you never know until you actually start. But I remember I put it on at the beginning of April, and even that first month made £400. And of course you're not getting any business in advance, you're only getting the last minute business. Because business from Airbnb, you get the people who want to come last minute, and then you get the people who know they're coming to a wedding in 6 months' time and they book. So you get both once you're up and running a bit.
So we started selling to people that we knew and people who were friends of people we knew, and then we started approaching shops in our immediate locality and seeing whether they would be willing to start selling them. And some of them needed display stands, so we had to then go away and create display stands. And then we just gradually moved further afield. So we started emailing and phoning people and visiting. Sort of organically grew like that.
I think I talked about it on social media, which made my friends and family aware of what I was doing. So they were the first sales. And then I approached local shops and online shops like Etsy and Folksy, and more recently with my art galleries and being involved in exhibitions, things like that.
So we launched the first collection in the September of 2004. And we just invited a series of boutique owners and store buyers to come and visit a showroom. We hired a small showroom space, and we invited them to come and see the product, as well as sending them images, kind of lookbook, introduction to the brand as well. So there's a lot of kind of groundwork, but it was really all based out of relationship with some of those initial buyers. And sure enough, we had a few come on board in that first season.
How I found my first customers, probably more that they found me. As I said, I've never done any advertising. The church has been incredibly helpful in that it gives you a network of however many people are in your church who are happy to recommend you on character, if nothing else. And that has built and built until now. Quite often, I can probably trace most people back to there, but there's quite often people that I can't even trace back to that.
So I was very fortunate that I had a number of contacts from when I worked corporately, and so I was able to go to them as my first customers, and then word of mouth just gets out.
So I was fortunate that, having worked in the city for 5 or 6 years and qualified as an accountant in the city of Cambridge before that, I had a reasonable network of clients, friends, people that ran businesses, and 2 of those clients had become really good friends and were prepared to commit to joining me in the new business venture. And whilst there are certain employment restrictions, if the client says they're leaving, the former employer can't really do anything. So I was really happy to get those 2 clients to support me through the journey.
Well, with Airbnb, it's a great website, so it does it all for you in terms of finding people to come and stay. And in terms of the music, just connections, people who want to learn the harp, they look you up online, they talk to somebody in a music shop, they talk to somebody who's already learning. So just very much word of mouth. So I didn't set out, I didn't sort of advertise myself as a teacher particularly.
I think our biggest challenge was trying to figure out how to do stuff and the priority that we needed to give to the 1,001 different jobs that needed to be done, and also figuring out who we needed to make the business a success. So trying to identify what roles we needed to fill, and then interviewing and finding them.
I think my biggest challenge was childcare. My children were still pretty young, and so just having headspace to think about the stuff that was tricky. What I did was actually it had some time away. So when I set up my website and when I set up my Etsy shop online, I went away and stayed in a travel lodge and had that headspace that I needed.
I think that finances are always kind of a challenge, and certainly in terms of kind of sales and ensuring that you've sold sufficient to be able to kind of progress. But I think more than that, it was the whole thing of putting yourself out there in front of an audience, and that can be quite a kind of exposing or vulnerable situation, because you're saying, this is what I'm about, will you buy it, do you believe in me sufficiently? And I think that was obviously quite a big kind of hurdle, I guess, in the initial years.
I think the biggest challenge was believing that this was something that was worth doing, and if it wasn't, then what else were the options, and overcoming all of those doubts and questions that you have, and actually determining that I was going to do it and that it was worth investing in.
So probably my biggest challenge in the first few years, I think there is a battle of the mind that you have with what you can offer and actually what you're energised to offer. And that was the battleground, often out of fear that you sometimes will go for something that actually isn't what you're really meant to be doing.
I think the whole concept of work-life balance, if there is such a thing, is something I needed to keep an eye on. And even now, many people ask for advice in that area, and I think you have to answer it for yourself. And in all honesty, if part of your calling is to business and to the workplace, then trying to suggest that you're balancing work and life is a bit of a misnomer. You need to know where your boundaries are, but actually it's quite a holistic sort of approach. And once I realised that I wasn't trying to balance these 2 things in tension, but that they were my life and what I was called to do, that it was a bit of a release. The other area, when you're starting a business, I think for many people, particularly in professional services where you're charging your time, is pricing and knowing how much to charge and what's the right thing to charge. And you maybe do a proposal for a client and they go, yes, straight away. And you think, shucks, probably could have charged, could have charged a little bit more. And other times they just laugh and say, no way, mate. You think, oh, I've got that a bit wrong. So over the years, you get a bit more of a feel for how you can do that. But there is no science in that other than knowing when you're going to say no. And if somebody doesn't want to pay what you think you should charge for a piece of work, you have to be prepared to walk away.
The biggest challenge for the Airbnb was getting the loan. It took about a year and I had to be really tenacious because our accountant said, I can't believe how much paperwork they are wanting. I mean, the file was just huge in the end. But it just felt like a battle to, no, this is something I think we should be doing. And so it just was a case of sort of pushing through. And the builder was actually willing to start before we'd agreed the loan because we worked with him a number of times before. But I just wouldn't let him start until we got the loan. So it did push it back a little bit, but it obviously worked out in the end. I think the challenges of teaching is how you organise your week, because what you don't want is a little bit of teaching here, a little bit of teaching there. To make life work, you want it to be efficient in the way that it's set up. So almost every 6 months, every year, I'm always tweaking things to sort of make the rhythm of my week work.
What helped me the most in starting at Cards from Africa is having a couple of people who were just really good to bounce ideas off and talk to about some of the problems and brainstorm and that kind of stuff. It's quite a lonely business, starting up a business, where it can be, and they helped it be less lonely.
I think I have an eye for quality that people have said, so actually producing something well put me ahead of a number of people straight away, and having courage to take risks and a confidence to just give it a try has taken me a long way. And just friends and family, they were all my first sales, and that was really encouraging.
I think one of the biggest things is relationships. For me, relationships with people that I work with, whether they are freelance employees, whether it's the factory, they were integral in me starting. So I had my studio on the factory floor for the first 11 years. And without the support of those guys, I really wouldn't have kind of got off the ground in the way that I did. But I think also relationship with God. I'm a Christian, and my faith too is a very fundamental part of kind of day-to-day running of my brand.
I think the biggest challenge was establishing that this was something that I felt that I should be doing, with so many doubts and questions about, including lots of other people asking, why don't you just go and get another job? This isn't funding itself. I overcome it by being stubborn, really, and I guess I genuinely felt from God that this was what I should be doing. Whilst the conviction that God was building something much bigger has come much, much later, there was a conviction that I should stay with what I'm doing.
Probably just knowing that is the best way forward. I knew corporately it was time for me to move on. It was time for me to do something different. And I think, if I'm honest, because I had the slight financial buffer, that gave me the tip really to just go and do it.
That's a fairly easy question to answer. It was family support, or family and friends. I think without support of my wife and the kids, or the kids didn't really know they were supporting it at the time, it would have been much harder.
Well, the feeling of dread that came over me in the summer holiday when I was about to go back to full-time teaching, I just began to feel I just can't do it anymore. And so it came out of, I wouldn't say desperation exactly, but it did come out the feeling of, I really cannot sustain this for another 20 years, and I just don't want to do it. So that, I suppose, was the motivating factor. I'm very blessed, I've got a very supportive family, I have a lovely home, so I had all the things around me. And I remember thinking, actually, if you're not paying tax and national insurance, you need a lot less money to live on. So because we had a little bit of money, when I worked out what you needed to live on without things you sort of paying out, I thought, we can, if there's a bit of a transition, it's going to be okay. I think I'm a sort of natural risk taker, and I'm a natural optimist. So those things, I think, probably help. So other people said to me, oh, you're being really brave, and I didn't really feel like I was being brave at all, because I expected it to work out.
Well, I've pretty much done everything myself as far as I can think of, even things like my website. I'm not technical at all, so I had to work out what to do and ask lots of questions. I had a friend who'd done her website and she showed me sort of the basics. Yeah.
All of the kind of product development was kept in-house. And I worked with freelance pattern cutters, sample machinists, and they would come and work with me quite closely on that. But then when we came to actually producing the larger production runs, that was all outsourced to manufacturers. But like I said, one of the factories that I worked very closely, I was working within the confines of their premises. And so although we were separate entities, we had that close working partnership.
Right at the start, I did everything myself and didn't really see any other option, but it became essential to outsource it when I realised that I wasn't doing lots of things very well. So skilled trades, I would get people in like electricians, plumbers. I brought them in to work for me and manage that as part of a project. And then as the business grew, it became very clear that I needed to get somebody else to do the accounts and bookkeeping. So I did that.
So the only area that I have obviously needed to outsource was having a professional accountant take on the books right from the beginning. Everything else is all singing, all dancing me.
I think as early as I could, I outsourced IT, and I still continue to outsource that because that is one of those things that when it works, it's fine. When it goes wrong, you need somebody to fix it quickly. And it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that we kept the finance and the accounting in-house.
So outsourcing, obviously with the Airbnb, the building and the whole project, we worked with a builder we knew from before, so we knew that he was good. One of the reasons I chose him was he's very, very good at quoting. So whenever he's given me a quote for a piece of work, I've never ever paid more, and sometimes I paid less. Because I knew there's this loan, that's the amount of money we have, we don't have extra, and we need it to obviously bring in income. And I knew that he would deliver, and indeed he did. In terms of the sort of design and all of that, I just did that myself, and how I would have liked if I was going to an Airbnb. I do obviously the teaching, but all the admin and all the other stuff. I do that as well. So I have a website, but I do that myself, and I like doing that. I like keeping it updated. I like creative endeavours, whatever they are really. So the website is part of that. So I use Everweb, which is a really great program, very simple, very intuitive, good support. If you can't do something, you can just look up and there'll be a video and somebody will teach you how to do it.